can indeed.
Yeah, yeah, I can see it just fine, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, yeah, good morning, everyone. Then this is the fourth. I was just trying to remember myself, in a series of briefings around patient online access, delivered by myself, Barry Jackson, on behalf of N3I, the information governance team here. As I was just kind of saying earlier on, I will do another of these. So we don't have an exact date for the switch on the system yet. It's just scheduled for April at the moment, according to the website. So there'll be another one of these before it actually goes live. If you keep your microphones on mute, that'd be fantastic. And what I'll do is I'll review the questions at the end of each section. There's only a couple of sections really, and as I said earlier, it'll only take about half an hour or so to run through this. And I'll review questions and hopefully answer them all at the end. So I'm going to do the bit that everyone probably hates really. Brief introduction. You guys know who I am, Barry Jackson. You just see my little picture there. I'm not going too much more into that. But what I'm going to do is, and I apologize for this, but while I've got you all here, I'm going to run through another couple of really quick things that are top of my list around IG issues at the moment. So while I've got your attention, let me just really quickly mention a few things here. Incident reporting. And please, this is just because I wouldn't say people got it wrong, but people are confused. Let's just clarify things. If you have any data incident or data issue, you're required under GDPR to report it now. As an organization that uses the Data Security Protection Toolkit, as you all will do, just click on this link. There we are, Data Security Protection Toolkit. What you need to do is, this is the system you need to use to report data incidents. You can't report them direct to the ICO. The ICO has got an agreement with the NHS that all organisations that have access to this toolkit will use the toolkit itself as their method of reporting. And there's a couple of good reasons why that works well for you. So I'm just going to quickly log in and show you where it is. So there we go, there's our login page. We get logged in. Along the top here, you get your basic assessment, which is obviously the primary part of the toolkit itself, but there's a button there to report an incident. You click on that, then click on there, and it'll take you through, ask you loads of questions, and then any incident you've got will appear here, and you can use this essentially as your incident reporting system. This is just a test one I put up on here, but you can use this as your local incident reporting system, put all data incidents onto here. When you go through it, the system will ask you a series of questions. Some of them are sort of data, can you explain what happened? You do a little paragraph about what happened. Others will be specific, either yes, no answers, or there'll be a numerical answer, i.e. how many patients were involved in it. If you've had a data breach, if you've lost a USB with 20,000 patient records on there, that'll be one answer, 20,000, or if you've sent an email inadvertently to the wrong person, then it's only one. And the result, the impact of those specific either yes, no, or numerical questions will determine whether your incident needs to be reported further than actually just within this system. So you meet the legal requirements by reporting it in this system, and based on the assessment that the system will do of the answers you give, it will decide whether that incident needs to be reported further on, i.e. directly into the ICO system. And by clicking a button within the Security and Protection Toolkit within the system you already completed, the system will send that to the ICO if it's necessary, and obviously for any further reporting as well. So that's how you need to be reporting your incidents. Just want to quickly run through that for you all. Excellent. So another one keeps coming up. It's a perennial thing, has been for a couple of years. Management of deceased records. This is a good news story, guys. There's a fact sheet here, which I'll just very quickly bring up and show you the sort of detail of it. So this is a fact sheet I produced. It's on our IG portal, and I think Ian is just going to put the portal address into the chat function now. I'm sure you're all aware of it. So it's one of our fact sheets that we've got on there. It goes through the concepts of deceased records, how it should work. The bit, and I know that everyone hates it, this printing off, and I'm on a mission to try and sort that out somehow, that you have to print off the record when a patient's deceased, but we'll get there with that one. But this is more just about how you deal with requests for access to patient deceased records. And basically the good news is it says you shouldn't have to do with them at all. It talks about the access to health records there, para 5, about why I don't think you should do it. There are people literally who get paid to do this work. So why would you, get involved in very complex legal questions when NHS England literally pay Capita to run PCSE and to employ people like me, IG security experts, who will deal with this on a daily basis and will deal with your requests. So that's and all the references there that you need, and all the guidance there is on that fact sheet. So that's about dealing with deceased patient records. And finally, patient registration issues. Just to note, please, we are still seeing a number of these coming through. I suspect we'll never get to a 0 point, and there will always be issues, but please have a look within your practice, have a quick review of the system you've got for registering new patients and for merging records and those types of issues, and just ensure that everybody is absolutely clear on how they're doing this, because if you get it wrong, in most cases they're rectified fairly quickly where we get an issue, which isn't fine, but it's okay. But when we get a registration issue wrong that doesn't get detected and then goes forward over a period of time, we get some huge problems, and practices can be really, it takes a huge amount of resource to get them fixed, and can in some cases compromise patients' health as well. So really have a look at registration issues and just be sure that the staff dealing with them know exactly what they're doing. Okay, and finally, I think, as I mentioned, Ian has popped the portal. This is our N3i IG portal, which has all the stuff about IG that we do. So there's the fact sheets I mentioned. There's the deceased patient records one there. There you go, a list of fact sheets on single page documents, just talking about those specific issues there. There's a blog which has stuff around obviously what we're talking about today. Can you work overseas? Some age issues around children, young people, getting into the GILIC stuff. So that doesn't need to be there anymore. Stuff on Yorkshire Care Record. Basically, loads of stuff in there in the blog section. And then videos of previous webinars that we've done, not just on patient access, but going further back on more general IG issues. So they're all available there. And then there's a little brief kind of weekly roundup of what's in my email for that week. So anyway, I hope you'll find that of interest. Hopefully, and you all know where it is. It's a resource. I try, as I'm sure you all don't want to get too many emails, so you will find that stuff on here just gets updated. I don't send emails out all the time, but I'll ask you just have a quick look on there and see if there's anything that's of interest to you. Okay, so coming back to accelerate patient.
Barry, can I just say something that was in the chat, and I'll raise it to you. We received a letter yesterday from the changes of contract that now say that we are responsible for providing dead patients' records. It came out yesterday. I can share with you for you to have a look after the meeting.
Sure, thanks. So you mean the contract's changing, saying that you have to because this is a contract requirement already, as I understand it, that this online access, has that been further?
Not the online. Sorry,
oh, the deceased
records. Yeah, the disease records.
Okay. No, I'm not aware of that, Mercedes. No, that'd be great.
Yesterday, it says Julie Lund just put it from Haxby. She just put new contract letter specify the practices no longer need to print out disease records, but we are responsible for dealing with requests. And it came up yesterday.
I mean, the printing off thing's fantastic. I'd love to see that. If you can send that across to me. I mean, that's, and I know for all of you that's been a really big issue. And that's fantastic if they've actually changed that now. The other bit around deceased records, I'm not sure that NHS England can just change the guidance through a contract. It's the law that's the issue here. So the Access to Health Records Act is what requires organisations to deal with them. But let's not do it. I'll have a good read of that and also put something out to everyone around. But thanks for raising that. I hadn't seen that at all. That's great.
It only came out yesterday.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, so accelerating patient online access. They've dropped the acceleration bit now. I know it's on the NHS Digital website. It's just I think you've got enabling patient online access now. So it's going to happen probably This question comes up quite frequently, and I saw an email the other day from one of the LMC organizations somewhere in the Southwest, I think, where they were very much objecting to it and didn't think it should go ahead and were calling on it to be halted. My understanding from speaking to the implementation team is that that's probably not going to happen, and that my personal assessment is that this is going to go ahead. I know we've had two in the last couple of years. We've had two major system sort of things that were about to happen, programs. So we had care data, and then more recently we had the new GP extraction system, both of which were stopped within weeks of them going live. And I think there are some people who potentially question whether this will go ahead. So my assessment is that it will, and for one of the main reason is that on the other two, there was a big public sort of backlash, but there was a public level of concern being expressed by public, certainly across social media, but genuinely as well around how their records would be used. With this patient online access, there isn't that level of public concern. If anything, there's a public demand for this. There's certainly that patients are interested in this, and there's a level of patients wanting this to happen. So it's the reverse of what happened with care.data and the GP extraction service, where this is now something that patients are actually asking for. So I suspect almost purely on that, it is going to go ahead. And so what I'm saying to you is, don't sit back thinking, oh, it's just those NHS digital things that they'll pull at the last minute. My assessment is that this is pretty much going to go ahead. So the main NHS digital page for it is this one here, and I'm going to run through this because it actually is very good, and they change it on a fairly frequent basis as well. And it has a lot of good background stuff, which I'll just run through. This part here, and I know it's just the last couple of days this has changed. So this section, what general practice staff should know. I mean, this is essentially really the sort of stuff that I was going to talk to you about. So I thought, let's just take it from the horse's mouth, if you like, and let's quickly run through what they're saying on here. So the fundamental point of it is that if you're using TPP or REMIS, from a date to be published sometime in April, patients will be able to see the entries to their records, or essentially anything that gets entered onto their GP record from that date going forward. So it's important to note that at the moment, this specific bit, this online access will be from whatever date it is in April going forward. Patients can, of course, as they can now, ask to see the historic bit as well, and you can go and enable that if you want to. But this really is just talking about anything that's added to the record going forward from the point in April at which it gets switched on. So on their online accounts, which will predominantly be accessed through the NHS app, but as I understand it, one thing that I think has changed is that other online systems as well will essentially do the same thing. So if you have the System 1 online app, so the practice I'm registered at uses System 1, and I've got there, as well as the NHS app, I've got the System 1 app. It will also be available through that as well, and any other online system that the patients use. And they will see full GP health record, as it says there, free text, letters and documents. So from practice perspective, practices need to be aware that patients will be able to see their future records. And that may need some changes to the way you process records. And I think if we take a very kind of high level view of this, at the moment, patients can ask to see their record. They can put in what we call a subject access request, and they can see their full healthcare record. And at that point, before they get to it, you do a filtering process. You check through it, you take out any redactions, sensitive information, and so on. Essentially, what this is doing is it's giving patients that real-time online access to their record. Therefore, the process that you would follow when you receive a subject access request, you almost need to do that in real time, because you need to be ensuring that appropriate redactions are done to the record as it's put onto the record, because the patient's going to be able to see it in. I'm not quite sure if it's actually real time or whether it's an overnight or whether it's, whether there'll be some delay in it. But essentially, as it says in there, as new information is entered, patients will be able to see it on the record. It says here patients won't see historical or past information unless they're given access to it. So that remains something that people still need to ask for. But of course, as we go forward, I mean, we're talking years and years, essentially patients will build up that record anyway. And this is an important one because I know this was a question that was asked at the last point on there, where patients won't have access to administrative tasks or communications between practice staff. So patients don't see that bit. However, I know in the webinar I was on just the other day, someone was asking about whether patients would see alerts. So if you had perhaps, let's say, a violent patient alert had been put onto a record, I think it was generally thought that patients would see that because it's part of that patient's record. So hopefully, but I presume you'd had that conversation with patients anyway, because if you put an alert on there, the patient should pretty much know. There are very few occasions where you do it where they wouldn't know. And the guys did take an action to see how they would deal with that, with those scenarios where you have an alert on a record that the patient isn't actually aware of. Okay, we're still waiting for some final material around safeguarding concerns, but I think the message I would say at the moment is the slight difference between the subject access request and the online access is that you can err on the side of caution, I think, with the online bit, because that's not a legal thing. A subject access request is a very legal process that requires you to legally give the patient all their information. This online access to their record isn't the same. It's giving them online access to the information that you put on there, but at the same time, the redaction process and the sensitivity things around safeguarding, it's not a legal process. Therefore, if you were to say withhold something because you thought it was sensitive, and let's say, for example, you got that wrong and it turns out actually the patient, there wasn't any reason to withhold it, you wouldn't have breached the law, if you like. If you get a subject access request, which is a legal process, and you withhold something incorrectly, then essentially you're in breach of the law. I'm not talking about people getting sued and so on, but it would constitute a breach of the subject access request, which is part of GDPR. But obviously, and you would just have to rectify that. But the online access bit wouldn't be a breach of the law; it would just be a breach of this process. So you can almost err on the side of caution, and that's what I'd suggest you do in terms of redacting information or withholding information at this stage. Certainly until people get more used to it and it starts becoming more part of people's daily routine. Why the change is being made? It says it's originally due for September, changed to April to give us time to do it. And basically, it's a legal it's an obligation that they have put in, that the NHS have decided they're going to do this, and it's in the contract. It's been something that's been available for some time for patients to have asked to have this, and now they decide, well, rather than just people waiting for people to ask, we'll essentially switch it on by default. So the default position is that patients will have access to their record. Okay, there's another link on here which I just want to quickly go to. I'm not going to go through all of this in any detail really, because obviously the detail is all here. I just wanted to show you that the detail is here. So clicking on that link there, where this is the guidance for GP practices. I'm going to scroll through this because I just want you to see this is sort of the level of detail which I think you need to know about, but you probably don't need me reading it to you. But I think you should go back and read through it at your own good time and in your own in your own time when you can pick up on the specifics of it. But hopefully what I'll just give you an idea of here is how detailed the guidance already is. So it says here what patients will see, and this is a really important concept at the very beginning there. You only see information once it's been checked and entered or filed onto the practice clinical system. Now, the one bit about this that I'm not clear on is I don't know how that works. I don't use System 1 or EMIS, so there must be, I presume there's a process whereby you put something onto there and you then have to say, yes, make it available on the patient record. And that's the bit that we're going to see. So you'll be able to see that. It talks about having it visible through the NHS app. And I did see, and it's somewhere on here, if you haven't already got the NHS app yourselves, and I suspect most of you have, it would be useful, and you can set up a test NHS app account for your practice. And then you'll be able to see essentially what patients are seeing. You could try out putting a letter on or something like that, but I presume that's what it means. So there is a test version of the NHS app that you can use. And it talks about it and part of it on here. So it's clear there says patients aren't getting access to their historical record unless they've asked and you have provided that to them, because that hasn't changed. Questions around the data controller. On a number of the national webinars, there have been some questions because this is the view was that this is the NHS now telling you how to do how to process data, and therefore they should be the data controller. And they've clearly had legal advice on that, which I'm not going to go into. But their view is that it doesn't change the status, that you are still the sole data controller of the patient record. They've got a DPIA, data protection impact assessment, which I haven't quite seen yet, but is, I'm told, is almost ready. So we should have that. We should certainly get that before it goes live. And the concept really here is about, this is getting into more the theory behind it, patient understanding their medical records and being more engaged with them, and being able to have that sort of review and reflect perhaps over their medical record after they've been and had an appointment or information has been added to it. They can go away and they can read it and reflect on it. What access patients have already, and you'll be aware that there are some people can have access to summary care record, to a detailed coded record, or to a detailed full record. It's just some examples of the sort of stuff people can see already. And then they talk about this future stuff, just from the set date in April when it will start, and people will then have full record access. So this is about how within the system here, how you can prevent information being disclosed. And let's say this is getting into the details of how the systems work, which what I am going to try and do, because it's the one part, as I said, that I'm not entirely clear on. I'm going to get our ask our clinical application team if they can look at getting us a couple of screenshots for the two different systems of what you need to do. I'm fairly sure you guys need to know this. We'll already know this anyway. It's a bit I've not seen, so I'm going to get them to do some screenshots and some guidance around that at that sort of level. We're going to talk about this in a moment, third-party access and the redaction. So just to show you that there is quite a lot in there already, but I'm going to look at some specific bits around the redaction element that I've provided. So it's just some guidance that I've done. But as you see, there's quite a lot on there at the moment. And it talks about the regulations for what you should do. So this is really how it links into a subject access request, essentially being, and I think long term almost building up a subject, an online subject access request. I mean, I suppose, and I suspect it'll still be quite some time in the future, but it would enable you to answer a subject access request by saying, well, you don't need to ask us for it because it's online already. You've done your redaction bit in real time, so everything that a patient would ask to see in a subject access request is essentially available to them online already. So I still think that's, how can I say, that's probably a little bit aspirational, but I think, over time, that's the position we will end up at. And obviously with the subsequent reduction in the need for the administration of a subject access request. Yes, stuff around here about rectification and amending medical records. It's probably slightly different to talk about. Interesting bit when patients move practices, that they will lose the data that they're seeing. So when you're registered at practice from April, you will start to see the data that's entered at that practice on your record. If you move practice, that data becomes historical data, and you get to a new practice and it will start again with just the data from that practice. And if you wanted to see the earlier stuff, you'd have to ask to be seeing the historical data. That just seems a little bit clunky to me. I'm not quite sure. It says that there's issues. I suspect there'll be ways of trying to smooth that out, because that still sounds a little bit clunky to me. Yeah, there's systems there. So saying here, again, I've not actually seen this in real life, but like the IGPR that I know many of you use, you can still use that within the the system on an ongoing basis, if you like. I don't quite know how that would work, but I've not seen it. But I know many people do use the IGPR software. It'll be interesting to see how that's going to work. System suppliers have done their technical stuff in the background, and I've got a note on my presentation here to say that there's actually nothing you need to do. My understanding, I've asked it a few times, is that this bit here is all the things that EMIS and TPP are going to do in the background, if you like. There's nothing that you guys will need to do on your local systems. At the point at which you get switched over, it will be told, you'll be aware of it, but you won't actually have to do anything. Okay, that's all that. And finally, there was this one here I was going to quickly look at. Yeah, so there's some bits here again about some guidance documents, which again I'm not going to go into, but there's more about the NHS out there, which is quite useful, and probably some posters and guidance material for patients, if you're interested in that. So, as I said, none of that's my stuff. I'm not claiming any ownership over this, but I just want to run through that because I think it demonstrates that there is an awful lot of stuff out there on the NHS digital site that you may want to look through. And if there's anything you thought, hang on, I need to just go back and read a bit more on that, that's obviously the way to do it. So let me just pick out, there's a few things I've picked out specifically from that I just want to go through, and based on a few of the sort of questions that I've had with you guys directly, if you like. So again, this stuff will have been probably repeated. It is a contract requirement at the moment, and patients are legally entitled to have access to their data, as we know at the moment, through a subject access request. And essentially, this makes a subject access request into a real-time, real-time access request. Is essentially what people will have by default. As I mentioned, as I understand at the moment, you don't need to have any local change to your systems. You won't need to do anything when the changeover happens. Essentially, if you were to go in now, you'd have to change someone and give them access. The default will become that they have access to their record. And there's a process by which, when you're entering records, entering data into record, that there's a level of an approval process that you need to do to say it can be visible on the patient record. And as I say, I'm going to get some screenshots on that, but you guys probably know this already if you're actually using the system. Test results is a query that was raised certainly early on, and clearly this is something that needs to be looked at. But again, they come in to your systems and they need to be approved first. So before they can appear on their patient's record and be visible to the patient, they need your approval. So this is one of those processes where you're going to need to have a review of it and say, well, when you're reviewing that test result that's come back, can it be just put onto the record? Will the patient be expecting to see it? Will they know what it means? Is it one where you'd actually need to discuss with the patient first? Do you need a phone call? Do you need an appointment? Whatever. So it'll just need a little bit more thinking through when these test results come through before they're approved to actually become visible on the patient record itself. The last two I've got here, there is specific guidance around these, but also I'm waiting for there's hopefully some new guidance coming along. Coercive relationships is an issue. It's a very difficult issue, but that's it. And there is some guidance on the NHS digital web pages. I'm not sure quite as how good it is, shall we say, and I'm certainly waiting for some more around that. And it does say the BMA are working on some guidance around it, and then there's some specific stuff around age that we're also slightly waiting for as well. So the biggest thing I think that you need to be considering now at practice level is that change to processes. Do you need to be, well, you clearly do need to be thinking about how you enter data into a patient record, and is it appropriate for it to be visible straight away? And that is going to require to engage with everybody in the practice. Everybody who enters data into the record are going to need to be aware of this change, that it's visible to them almost immediately. Bear in mind, it's feature data only, so you have to, it's not too much worry about previous stuff at the moment. And you're redacting data as it's entered onto the record in real time. Now that's the big, and I'm sure that is the big challenge. Although, again, what I would say is I'm going to talk about redactions specifically in a moment, that there isn't a huge amount of data that needs to be redacted. And I do, from having done this work before this specific program came along, the last couple of years, we've done quite a bit of work on redactions. And what I would say is just, it's quite an extreme thing to redact information and isn't always necessary. Probably saying that my general assessment is that across general practice, from what I've seen, that people occasionally redact more than necessary. And so if you're confident with the redaction process and you know what it is and you know what you're looking at, I suspect there's probably less than you need to. That specific bit, of course, applies to subject access requests. As I said, within this system, you can probably be okay being erring on the side of caution here anyway. So that's not perhaps too much of a concern, but just do bear in mind that you may not need to redact as much as you're possibly thinking that you do, or that you may do now. So, and on that note, let's have a quick look at these couple of very specific resource things that we've got available. The serious harm test is the first one. This is always gets talked about in terms of redactions. This is a newsletter that I've done. And we're saying here, look at section 3, which is the definition of the serious harm test from legislation. Complying with the subject access request, essentially it's the same thing we're saying. The serious harm test would apply to adding data onto a patient's record that they're going to see. So it says you'll be exempt from applying or from adding the data to the patient record to the extent that if you did comply with it, it would cause serious harm to the physical or mental health of any individual. That's serious harm, remember, not just kind of embarrassment or stuff like that. And the guidance here says, you know, the data subject or any other individual, that view, actually that redaction view, in terms of the legal bit, in terms of a subject access request, has to be taken by a health professional involved in the patient's care, which is slightly different to the online access. So essentially, any member of the practice team could be involved in deciding that a certain piece of information doesn't go onto the patient record, because remember, that's not a legal process, that's just essentially an NHS records management process. The subject access request is the legal process where you have to follow exactly what it says in the guidance here. But I think you do them the same if you like. The BMA guidance says here, circumstances in which information may be withheld on the grounds of serious harm are extremely rare, and not just because patients may find them upsetting. I think that's a quite a telling comment there. Extremely rare. There may be cases in practices where you don't see any in the course of a year. You know, it's not designed to be a common occurrence here. And it's always worth bearing in mind what you're doing, certainly in the subject access request element of this, is that you're essentially not giving someone their right. Their legal right is to see information. If you're withholding information from them, you're denying them access, and you're denying one of their fundamental rights, which is quite a serious thing to do. Okay, so that's the serious harm test then. As I say, bear in mind that the concept of serious harm, and it should be an extremely rare process for it to be carried out. The next one we've got here is around third-party information. Again, one which can cause confusion at times, and I know it's confused me at times, so I've tried to sort it out on here. There are some, again, there is always more guidance here. The Royal College of GPs is an excellent guidance, and it talks about information that has confidential information about a third party. So third-party data must have an element of confidentiality to it. I like this little scenario here. I thought it was quite useful. I always like this sort of thing. Hopefully it makes it a bit more real. So I'll just read this through because it's something I came across. This is a fairly new one I put up on here not so long ago. So Bart Simpson attends the practice with his parents to investigate his ingrowing toenail, and his mum Marge says that his younger sister had also previously suffered with the same problem. And this could be some years later. Bart makes a request for a copy of his records, unless he already knows who the third-party information relates to, it's not necessary to redact any of the names. So an important point here is if someone knows the information already, then you don't need to redact it because you're not achieving anything. Redaction is designed to prevent an individual finding out something that they don't already know, something which has a level of confidentiality about it. But if they already know it, then it's not confidential. So if a patient, for example, comes and always attends the practice with a sister or someone like that, and you know the discussion here around he's gone with his parents, you wouldn't later on when they ask for that information, you wouldn't redact that information because they know the information already, that they were there and they were party to it. So if the person knows the information, it's not necessary to redact it. Point 5 here talks about health staff and the personal details of health workers. So in general, the general rule is that people's information, if you're working in as a health professional, your information gets added in there. It's part of the job, if you like. If you put an opinion, if you do something on someone's medical record, to some extent, even if you just access that record, then the patient's entitled to know who's done that, who's put that note in, who wrote the letter, for example, or who accessed their record. And there's an exemption to that if there's a real credible threat of violence, perhaps to an individual. Again, exceedingly rare circumstances, but they are there. Okay, I don't think there's a huge amount more, because actually I think that's the end of the presentation. I guess just to recap, really, my assessment is that this is going to come. It's going to happen at a date to be announced in April. There's a huge amount of information there, and I suspect me going through a lot of this stuff is actually just repeating the stuff that is on the NHS Digital pages, which is actually, I think, for once, it is fairly good. I like a lot of the detail, and there's any bit you pick, there's always a little bit more detail you can get on it. There are a couple of areas I think where we're still waiting to see a little bit more guidance, where I'd like it to be clearer. And then there's the actual system bit, i.e. what happens if I press this button, and what does that look like? And as I say, I'm going to get that for you fairly soon. There was one, let me just recollect, there was one document I just really did want to go through, and I'm going to whiz back to it because I can't quite remember where I put it. It was on here. This is actually a very good document about redacting information. What's this one here? So it still says draft. My understanding is, I got a copy of this the other day, that it's not draft. The final draft was that it was just waiting for a sign off, and I haven't got the exact final sign off on here yet. But as I say, it's on the blog there, and this is about redacting information, and I think this is really good. It's a really good document, and it does go into how to redact in an EMIS, for example, there, and it does show you, if you're redacting information, the exact sort of stuff. Click this button, press that, that's what will happen. And a System Warrant has the same thing. So I'd recommend you have a look at that document, which, as I say, if you could see, yeah. So it's on the web portal there, on the blog section, and then the top one at the minute is Accelerating Patient Online Access, and it's that document there, redacting information, guidance for practice. I think that was really good, and I had a good read through that. See, with those screenshots as well, that's a really useful document to have. But I would say in general, discuss this around the practice, have a look at your in team meetings, ensure that all the clinicians who are going to be entering data are aware of this. It's really important. You don't want to get to the stage where people say, I just didn't know. This has been around for a while now. People should know enough about it to be aware anyway. Okay, let me just stop sharing that screen now, and I'll look through the questions that we've got. So let's see, we can see. It's back to the top here. Okay, I've gone back up to the bit about Mercedes saying stuff. Right. I don't know if I've gone back far. Let's go back a bit further. Right, okay, yeah, the new stuff there. Right, yeah, Julie, I've gone back to yours. The ages, yeah, I think there's a bit around the ages that I need to clarify. But I'll get that. That's on my list of things to absolutely nail down at what age does this happen. And I think it'll be driven by the NHS app to some extent, by what age you can have access to the NHS app, which I think is still possibly 16. I'm not entirely sure on that one, but yeah, the age issue is something that I do need to bottom out and get back to you on. Let's see what happens about looked after children. Looked after children, I suspect if they've got access to, well, I don't know if they have access to the NHS app, but the children bit is you need to be specific about the ages, and then within each age bracket, depending on what access they're permitted, you may be looking at GILEC competence for your sort of early teens, or as with normal children, it's who has parental responsibility is the main question, whether they're able to look at them. But the whole thing about children and ages, yep, I'll have another look again.
Barry, what happens about the parents then that are actually parted, and you've got mum and dad, and both sort of wanting the information? Can they both have the information?
Yes, I've had this question before. So up to the age of 10, both birth parents, that's right, are legally jointly responsible, even if they're separated. That they're legally have joint responsibility for a child, unless a court has decided otherwise. But that's the default position.
Right.
When it gets past 10, you start coming into other things where one parent, depending on which one the child lives with, will often be designated as being the one who makes decisions. So things such as vaccinations and so on. If you have a disagreement, there needs to be one person has to decide, but they should also always make decisions like that in the best interest of the child. That's the kind of the legal bit around it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. When patients start to complain about not being able to see historic data from the previous practices, yeah, so essentially, as right now, as a patient, they could come along and ask to see their historic data, and you could switch that on in the system for them. And essentially, that's what you're going to have to do. So if you get a patient who moves to you, who will be, and if there's someone who's, we're talking probably about April, May, June, as we move forward with this, a patient come to you and say, I used to have, obviously they would all have had online access at their previous practices. I'd like to see the historic stuff, because all they're going to get is kind of from the date they join you, they'll then get all the data forward, because all the stuff at their previous practice is marked as historic. You will need to go in and switch on that historic access on the system for them. That makes sense. I think it does. And I agree. I think that's a bit of a clunky system, and I suspect that they're looking at how they can re-enable that to become, well, yeah, if you've seen it already, then why would you take it away? And that's one of the that's going to be a really frustrating thing for people to do. If they say, well, I had all this access already, and particularly if they've had a condition that's been where they're having treatment, and then all of a sudden they move practice and find they've lost all that access. But I say they're going to need to ask you, and you will then have to switch it on, because from that point, instead of being their current record, as they move practices, it becomes their historic record, which they have to ask to be able to see. Yeah, Alison, that's a really good point. Patient, in terms of real time, I'm not entirely sure what they mean by real time. Whether it's literally as soon as you put a letter onto the system and 2 minutes later the patient sat at home could see it, whether it's a couple of hours delay, whether it's an overnight process, I'm not entirely sure. But you're right, if you have things such as a cancer diagnosis, that, as I understand it, that information should come through in a way in which the practice get it first, and then review it, and then put it onto the record at their time of choosing, if you like. So if it's a cancer diagnosis that comes through, you would receive it, and you would follow your process, whatever that is, to contact the patient, discuss with them, whatever, and then file file it in a way in which it becomes visible on the record, or you put it onto the record and ensure that it's marked as not visible at that time until you've had the discussion with the patient. And these are things that you guys will know better than me, because you'll know the system in terms of how that actually works. But that's
the problem, Barry, is that it doesn't necessarily always happen, because sometimes if the letter comes from hospital and we didn't necessarily refer the patient, they were already under the care, the doctor may assume that that conversation has been had between the consultant and the patient. And like somebody did put on the chat, we have had that in the past, in which somebody was diagnosed as cancer. We then filed, because at Woodford we've always given them access to the full record anyway. And we then filed the letter, but the consultant hadn't had a conversation with that patient, and we don't have any way to know if that conversation has been had or not, because it doesn't say on the letter that the conversation has been had. So it is quite a dangerous one. But then you can lock the consultation and not make available, but then it's actually then remembering to then make it available at a later date. So it's quite a minefield, to be honest.
no, absolutely, Mercedes. I agree. It is. Although I suspect what I would say in that situation, just trying to think, it's not a whole lot different to what you have now, in that you still need, you get the letter in, you still need to have that conversation with the patient before you file it, if you like. Yeah, I suspect that the things will occasionally get put on, say incorrectly before necessary, or before you'd want them to be. And I don't know how, other than the hospital. Perhaps you need to engage with them and ensure that they are aware that they need to be clear in the communications between the hospital and yourself, how much a patient knows. That has to perhaps becomes more a part of the communication between the hospital and yourselves about how much the patient has already been told, so that you're in a better position to know whether you can file that onto the record directly or whether you need to have that discussion with them. I know that's not an ideal answer at all, but I suspect that's the only way around it. I think, and I don't mean to be harsh. There will be lots of issues. There are lots of queries coming up here. What I'm trying to say is we need to find solutions to it, because my assessment is this is going to happen. Therefore, we need to be working about, and within the practice, you need to be thinking about how we're going to fix this. So you've actually come up with a really challenging issue there. I don't know an easy answer, but there has to be one, because the system is coming online fairly soon. Therefore, we have to develop processes within the practice that will work, and that may need to go back to the hospital and say, you're going to have to be clear on your letters that come out, what interaction you've had with the patient. Does the patient know this already? Because we need to know that even more importantly now, because we're potentially going to be putting this stuff onto their record. Yeah, I've just thought of one, and I'm sure I was going to mention this at some point during the presentation, but it slipped by me. But actually, it's quite relevant. There was a question, it was probably a couple of webinars ago on the NHS Digital one, and a practice manager asked, what happens if we get a letter with some sensitive medical information, as you do, about a patient, and you file it on the wrong patient's record? And the implication, I think, from the practice manager was that that was a really bad thing, and that would potentially be a data breach, because the patient would have online access and they would see it, and that would cause problems. And yes, it would. However, I think the answer was that yes, the data breach, it is a data breach, because the wrong person will have access to that information. However, it's actually a good thing, because if you didn't have the online access, there's a potential that no one would have noticed that data breach. You would have put the letter on the wrong person's record, and it would probably have gone through without being noticed, or perhaps for a period of time. Whereas if the patient whose record has gone onto has online access and looks at it, say, oh, hang on, this letter isn't for me, we kind of hope that they will report it back to the practice, which will enable you to take the letter off their record, so that sorts that bit out, and you've had a minor data breach in which that patient has seen that record, and that's what it is, but it enables you from a clinical perspective to get that letter onto the correct record, which is actually more important than the fact that someone else has inadvertently seen it, because that's happened anyway. And so there's a question there about data quality, that who's the, with the best will in the world, you guys in practices will perhaps struggle to check and review and to go through records, perhaps as much as you'd like to be able to. But with this system, you've got patients as well who will be looking. And I absolutely know you guys have challenging patients, and for them, this is going to be another way in which they can challenge you. And you'll probably have some patients out there who you've never heard from, who, once this is in place, will be questioning and challenging you on this stuff. And that's as it is, I'm afraid. There's no way around that. But I suspect that for the majority of patients, this will be seen as being a good thing. And I think you have to try and embrace that to some extent. Although, as I say, I don't underestimate the challenges this is going to give you. You are going to get people coming back to you, asking questions about the information in their record. And that's just, I suppose, a fact of life. That's what they're going to do. But hopefully, the positive about it is that if there are errors and discrepancies that they notice, then they can be rectified, which would be a good thing on a kind of bigger picture type thing. Although it's going to, it's a really difficult one to estimate how much this is going to increase your workload, how many of these sorts of challenges you're going to get. I would hope it won't be as bad as some people are predicting. It's probably as good as I could say. Right, let me whiz through, see if there are any more specific questions. So what's about when solicitors want records? Yeah, there's no reason why a patient can't print off their own record. Again, if this builds up to being the full record, or the record that relates to a specific episode of care that might be relevant to them, they can print that off now, and do it themselves. Try and see. Caroline, I'm trying to just understand that the point you put in this is Caroline Moore. We've already found that already in manner is issue tools covered under the part the patient ticks to ask for access, which states they may see things they did not know. So when you go onto the NHS app, I'm trying to remember. I noticed that it does say that there may be there is a little kind of challenge button there, isn't there? That says you may see something. You shouldn't see things you weren't aware of. And we talked about the whole redaction bit. I'm not sure. Caroline, are you able to come online and kind of explain that a little bit? Because or perhaps better to me, because I'm not sure I've quite got my head around that. I don't know if she's still online. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, Caroline also says, will they be able to see admin tasks between GPs and staff? That's a no, and I think that was pretty much that was a specific point that was mentioned. They won't be able to see tasks that get sent. Julian,
even clinical tasks. That there are admin tasks in which you don't name the patient, but then there are some that it goes from the patient record. So there's, do you know what I'm trying to say? Some of them the patient is actually named. I know it's not part of it doesn't look, when you look in the system, it doesn't look like it's part of the body of the record. It sits in a different area, but it's still attached to their patient.
Yeah, I suspect not then, because it was specifically a bit about tasks, and it said that you wouldn't see tasks between.
Okay.
I'll double check on Twain Mercedes. I'll take away and double check that one.
Thank you.
The age question again, Julie, we'll keep a look at that. I'll get some more information on that. I think it'd be useful to have like a little, I'm just thinking on my health now, a little matrix of ages and what you can do at different ones. So I'll try and put something like that together. No, Alison's question there is very specific, that you won't see information on other System 1 users. If there's a share in place with another System 1 organization, the only information that will be seen on the online record is the GP practice record and information that's entered into the GP practice system and unit, not stuff from other organizations. Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think, yeah, I probably agree with that comment there, and I'm pretty sure they haven't done that. NHS app for children changed to 13 last month, COVID passport. Yeah, that's right, Lisa. The NHS app bit, because it was linked to the COVID passport, I do remember that the ages were going to have to be changed to reflect the age at which children were being vaccinated. But again, I'll need to do a quick review on that. So the whole thing around children and age and stuff, I will review. So Simon says, if you have a newly registered patient who has already had access from the past practice, we will need to go through the redaction process again. That's a really good question. It's similar to a subject access request question, and yes, you do, because when you have a patient transferred to you, you take on responsibility for their record. If they then ask for that record under a subject access request, or if they use this system and ask for access to their historical record, which essentially is the same thing, then you're as being the data controller at that time, then you would need to go through and do a check to see there's nothing that needs to be redacted. You would hope that the previous practice had already done that. There's a system question there, isn't there? So if you have data in the system that you've marked as not being visible to the patient online, and patient moves to a new practice, I presume that all those sort of bits where you've marked certain data as being not visible would stay as being not visible. I'm sure they would. I'll check that, but I'm sure that those sort of controls that have been put in place would stay the same. But you are right. If they ask for access to the historical record, you do still have to do a check through it, because you are the data controller of the whole record, including the stuff that you've received from other practices. Can't see message. All right, thanks, Alison. She's put the message. Your record may contain sensitive information. If someone is pressuring you for this information, contact your GP surgery immediately. So, is that relating to sort of coercive patients and that type of thing? Just gonna have a look and see if I can get there. I can't. It'll take me too long to get on my own phone. And your GP health. Okay. I mean, it's clearly right, but it's very difficult. I mean, coercive relationships are going to be very difficult by their nature. We know that. I suspect that if someone comes to you on their own and says, "I'm in a relationship and I don't," essentially they can ask you not to make certain information visible. So if you're seeing a patient who tells you they're in a coercive relationship and that they don't want this episode of care or certain details to appear on their online record, then that would be a good justification, obviously, and you should do that. You should follow what they're saying and ensure that information isn't made available to them. I can't see any other way of doing it. We can't second guess how that would work and what type of relationships people are in. So you can only rely on the individual telling you, coming to you and saying, I don't want this information to appear on my record. Yeah, Simon, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so predictably, this has generated, I mean, first of all, thanks. Thanks for trying to thread our way through this. This is a nightmare. It's created an enormous amount of queries from our constituents. We met with 13 other LMCs in England yesterday to talk about this. There's a good degree of concern and reservation, and we're trying to pull together a guidance paper. Your guidance is helpful. We're probably going to be pushing the barriers a little bit more in the guidance that we're going to try and give. There's clearly 113 practices in the Humber patch that are going to be impacted by this. There's a lot of people on this call who are clearly interested in this as well. So my concerns are around the fact that GP practice is still the data controller. So they're ultimately still on the hook for this. A third party is coming in and imposing this. It may or may not be a contractual requirement that people want to comply with. I just wonder whether some of the practices who are really nervous about this, who are overworked, don't have the time, capacity, headspace to do it, can switch it off. So that they can say we're simply not going to allow access to that. The concerns are around the significant additional work for practices, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, we hold you in high respect, Barry, and we're asking you a lot of questions, and even you are struggling to answer some of these. So imagine the huddled corners and the concerns that we're going to be having in practices trying to respond to some of this. So we think there'll be significant work for practices, lots of potential for error. And from that liability being generated, I'm still a data controller. It's my practice, it's my error. I'm on the hook for it. And you touched on it, but a drive for more patient queries. So the filter that is the GP at the moment in terms of releasing information has gone. It's great that it's only from this point forward, because it would be even worse if it was retrospective. I think that would be really difficult to do. But that's gone. So patient looks at records, is concerned about what they see, and jams the switchboard trying to get through, asking questions. I think it will happen. So pace is a concern. We're potentially 7-8 weeks away from this. Yeah, I know it's been trailed for a long time, but people don't tend to focus on things until they're about to happen. So I guess the question is, where are we if a practice says absolutely no way can I do this? What would your advice be?
I'm not sure that I'm positioned to give advice. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, with it, around what the practice should do. I totally agree, Simon, with the points you've made. I don't think you'll be able to technically switch it off, which is because you don't have to do anything to switch it on. As I understand it, the systems will, it'll be done in the background, if you like, and essentially all patients will have default access on whatever data gets switched on. Whether technically you could do anything to switch off, I don't think that would be the case. You could take a view that you wanted to, have a blanket sort of edict across a practice to say, don't put anything onto the record without marking it as not visible. So and that would be it's a bit overcautious, but that would be a way of achieving what you're trying to do, i.e. that the patients don't get to see any of the data that gets put on their records. And I think that'll be the only way you could possibly be able to do that. And I think that would be, I don't know. I don't know what view engineering would take around, are you complying with your contract? I suspect they may well defer to that, because it's as they clearly put at the top of everything, this is a contractual requirement. But that's beyond my remit, Simon, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Brad. I mean, what might happen is that people might start keeping records in another way, a separate system, another confidential area. So there's an area that they're happy for, because the contemporaneous redaction requires a good degree of input to do that. So it might be that people tend not to want to do it. So no one said that, and it's just a potential. That's all.
I do think, as I said, you can, because it's not a legal process, you can err on the side of caution. So you could be certainly redacting more information, and it's almost the opposite of what I've been saying to people around subject access requests, where my assessment was that people were redacting too much with subject access requests, and one or two that I'd seen, and therefore I tried to say with those 2 guidance documents, it is a really serious thing, it's very rare, and so on. For the online access, because you're not implementing a legal process, you could say err on the side of caution and almost gradually introduce it by saying, don't don't put anything that you think at all might be sensitive. You know, make sure you tick that button to make it not visible on the record, and let's perhaps, you know, do some sort of review in there or something like that. But as you say, it is creating more work, and I don't have an answer to that one, I'm afraid. It clearly will. Just the whole changing of the process is going to create work, and it's all right. I'm sure NHS Digital and people like me saying, here's all the guidance, here's loads of, you know, 20, 30 web pages you need to read through, and you need to do all of that. That doesn't help you with the process of doing it itself on the front, you know, on your front line, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks very much.
Okay. We've got on here, Alison. Yeah, Alison, that's really really is a good point. I think the second bit is quite right. The practice can set certain information to be not displayed online. Clearly, test results, yes, until they've been discussed. I don't know about. Yeah, it's a difficult. I think the area you get into is going to be really difficult, is where you're making judgment decisions on what's going to be upsetting, shall we say. Because that's the phrase you've used there. You may see something upsetting. That's going to be a judgment. There are going to be patients out there who want to see stuff straight away, who want their test results dropped straight into the record because they want to know them, and who won't be upset by them. They just simply want to know, and they're informed patients, and they know what they're looking at and talking about. How you make a judgment on which ones they are and which ones are likely to be upset, even by a result that says everything's fine, but they want to have that to talk. They want that to talk through with them. That's a difficult issue, which is why I'm saying the legal bit is the redaction bit, which talks about serious harm. There's then, and I appreciate there's then a huge kind of spread, if you like, between those people who will just be a little bit upset to those who will be very upset to those who actually wouldn't be upset at all. And the difficulty you have is making the judgment on which one that is. If you kind of default to saying, well, we'll redact everything, you are going to find that, not upset, but there'll be people who would be happy with seeing more things in real time, and will want that, and may potentially be bringing that forward to you as well. You know, you just be careful you don't set off a train of having more people asking because they're now aware that they can. Well, why isn't that on there? Why aren't I seeing this? Yeah, stuff that they won't understand. Of all of this, I think that's going to be potentially the more difficult bit. I have online access to my own record now, and I'm sure, you know, you guys have got the NHS app on your phones, and you'll have seen, you know, look at your own at your own information. Do you fully understand everything that's on there now? What did I see one the other day where they've been doing the summary care record upload and various things like that were on there. And I think, if anything, this is my non-working in a practice sort of assessment of things, I think it may be misunderstanding, not knowing what it says. That may be more of an issue, and you may get more questions around that than actually people who become upset or who don't like what they're seeing, which doesn't really help you, because it's still a phone call that you're going to have to deal with in one way or another, unless the system can make it easier and more accessible. I still think some of the way that the NHS app displays your medical record isn't always as clear as it can be. It might need a bit more of an explanation to be added in there in some way. Yeah, and I think, as Richard said, people will see things that they feel are ambiguous, they don't understand, and they'll ring the practice up. You know, I can't see an easy way around that. As I say, I think you can, as I said, use that term. You can err on the side of caution, but you are still going to need to be putting stuff out, or stuff will be going out. Remember, this is the default position is that the stuff you put onto a patient's record will be seen, will be visible to them, unless you mark it as not being visible. So it depends, and that's the bit that you need to work through at the practice level to see how that's going to fit with the process, and understanding what you can and can't. Well, not what you can't, what you can and what you perhaps shouldn't, or should be marking is not to be visible. That's Richard. I don't know where to go with that. Yeah, I think there is a default warning on there. Yeah, but I also think, probably taking a slightly different view, I think the majority of patients will be positive about this, and then, you know, yes, you have your challenging patients, no one denies that, but for the majority of patients, this should be a positive thing. You know, I think it's a positive thing. I like the fact that I'm going to be able to do this if I have some future care from my practice. I like the fact that I'm going to be able to review it and see what it says. And I think most patients will take that general sort of view that it's a good thing. We just need to be able to manage those that not quite misuse the system, but are confused and want to know more, and we'll be putting in more calls about it. I don't know if you can set up your phone systems to have press 1 if your inquiry relates to online access, and then you can have someone who can deal with that sort of stuff. I don't know. All right, guys, there's a few things I've specifically taken away from this. Really appreciate you all spending time and listening, and the comments you've made is fantastic. I'll go through the meeting chat and make sure I haven't missed anything. A couple of specifics that I'm going to take away around ages, certainly, and the well, I'll actually I'll listen through the recording again, pretty much to make sure I've got everything. And I'll, as I said, I will guarantee to do you another one as soon as I get the date for the switch on. We'll do another one of these, by which stage just before it goes live, and we should know exactly, hopefully we'll know everything by then, the answer to those specific questions, and anything else you want to check out me. As always, and anything to do with RG at all, please just drop me an email. Okay, thank you all very much this morning. Take care.